Well, hello and good morning. Welcome to another Sunday Coffee with Dr. Childress here. So today, obviously, I'm going to be talking about your traumatization. You probably know you're traumatized, but you don't know the extent and why that's occurring. And so that's what we'll talk about today. There's essentially two locations for your trauma. The first is called traumatic grief, and that's from the separation from your child, and your child feels the same way. There's a traumatic grief, and that's a grief that can never be resolved. So let me talk about that for a second. I first came across traumatic grief when I was working with spina bifida patients at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, and their parents. Um, because their parents go to the hospital expecting to have a child, and they have all these dreams for their child, and they learn at the hospital when the baby's born that there's a birth defect and spina bifida, problem with the spine fusing, and their life changes because of that major birth defect and the consequences of that. So they wind up grieving the loss of the child they had imagined, and yet they still have a child. It's just not the child they had anticipated. And so that was my first introduction to traumatic grief. It's a grief that can never be resolved because, typically grief involves the death of somebody, but the child's there. There's nobody dead. And that's exactly what's going on in the family courts as well. Before the divorce, you had a child or children. And then as soon as you get the divorce, you have no children anymore. It's like your children are dead. And that's essentially what happened. The pathological parent essentially killed your children in revenge for the divorce. I mean, that's just immensely brutal spousal abuse. But it's not being diagnosed or anything. And so all the parents have this grief that cannot be resolved, a traumatic grief. And the children have a grief that cannot be resolved because that's the way the attachment system works. And so there's traumatic grief, and it's a complex trauma. It's not like a bomb exploding kind of PTSD trauma. It's a low level of continuous stressful chemicals in your brain. It's just stress and stress and stress and stress and prevents the neural networks from integrating and growing and all sorts of bad stuff from all the stress chemicals. It's called complex trauma. Um, and so that's the first location of trauma, is um, the traumatic grief. And then you're in the court system that's all new and they're traumatizing you as well, and they're taking your child away and you're fighting with reality. And so there's a whole bunch of trauma associated with that, psychological trauma. The second source of trauma that you're likely aware of but may not identify is called institutional betrayal trauma. And that's from the professionals around you, the ones who should protect and don't. Now, I first learned about betrayal trauma when I was working with sex abuse. I was working with children who've been physically, sexually, neglectfully, and psychologically abused, placed in foster care. And then CPS would send them to our clinic for assessment and treatment. And with sex abuse, there's a very characteristic role called the betrayer. And it's the one who should protect and doesn't. And typically, or often, sometimes, that's the mother's role in the family, where she sacrifices the child to the new husband, the stepdad, in order to save her marriage. That's called the betrayer role. She knows what's going on. She just doesn't want to know. And so when I came into the family courts, I immediately recognized the betrayer role from the professionals It's the psychologists who should protect and don't, and the licensing boards that should protect you from the unethical psychologists and don't. The court who should protect you from the spousal abuse and protect your child from the abuse, and doesn't. And so that's the betrayer role of the professionals who should protect and don't. And that's called institutional betrayal trauma. It's been described by Jennifer Freud, Freyd. She was a professor at Oregon, and now she's retired and has a Center for Institutional Courage, which is how we need to respond to institutional betrayal trauma. So there's actually two sources of trauma. And what the research says on institutional betrayal trauma is it's worse than the trauma. Okay, so the trauma is bad. The institutional betrayal trauma is even worse. It does even more damage and worse things to the person. So it's pretty brutal what you're going through. And if you go to my consulting website on the parent resources page, that's what I start with, is your institutional betrayal. I've got resources all about the pathology in the family courts, but we cannot solve anything as long as you have ignorant, incompetent, and unethical mental health professionals who are simply financially exploiting you. And so the first thing I link to is the 3 articles on institutional betrayal. The seminal article from Smith and Freud in the American Psychologist, and the American Psychologist is the journal of the American Psychological Association. So that's their main journal. This is an article in their main journal about institutional betrayal. It's a real thing, and it's happening to you. And then there's another article by Smith, Gomez, and Freud having to do with the psychology of judicial betrayal. Let me say something about that. Now, this particular article was about a child who was sexually abused and by her dad, and she told, but then the institutions didn't protect her. And so until finally, when she was an adult, a DA went back and looked at the case and said, you know what, we really messed up on this one, and took responsibility, the institutional courage. And this now adult child had been having flashbacks and PTSD and all sorts of stuff about the sex abuse. But the moment the moment this DA took responsibility and said, we messed up, it was our fault, the now adult child's symptoms went away. They resolved. And that's important for the family courts, because we have estimated between 300,000 and 1.5 million survivors of the family courts over the past 40 years of failed forensic custody evaluations. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal because professional psychology is basically neglected and turned you over to be exploited for 40 years. And so there's a lot of institutional betrayal trauma out in the world of now adult children and the parents who lost their children. And it's continuing. We not only need to resolve what's in the family courts, we need to go back and help the people who endured the trauma and are still being traumatized, traumatic grief and institutional betrayal trauma, and recover them and heal them. So it's a large scale kind of thing once we start doing it. But that second article just indicates that judicial betrayal is a thing, and that's also what's happening in the family courts. That's one of the institutions that's involved in the betrayal. And then there's another article about the American Psychological Association and institutional betrayal, having to do with that enhanced interrogation, the torture, and that's from Gomez and a group. And it's in the Journal of Trauma and Dissociation. So institutional betrayal is a thing, and parents, I recommend you begin to understand that. Now, up on my website, these are the questions that need to be answered for you parents. And I have them up on my website, up on the attorney resource page. You can get these, you can freeze frame and write them down. Basically, whenever a child is rejecting a parent, that's child abuse by one parent or the other, okay? Because the attachment system is a motivational system. It always tries to bond to the parent. If we have a child seeking to flee from a parent, well, the only thing that causes that is child abuse by that parent, reversing the child's normal attachment bonding. Or if there's no child abuse, then it's psychological child abuse by the allied parent who's creating a factitious attachment pathology and a persecutory delusion in the child to meet their own needs. So it's going to be child abuse by one parent or the other, which gives you the scope of the problem. Because in all of these cases over the past 40 years, the only thing that causes the symptom is child abuse. So a child abuse diagnosis should have been rendered in every single case and was never rendered. So we have misdiagnosed the pathology of child abuse in the family courts for 40 years. The forensic custody evaluators lies directly in their lap because they're the ones that own you. They're the ones that are doing this stuff. So I have the first, it's a path A, path B. Path A is that the targeted parent is abusing the child in some way. And path B is that the allied parent is psychologically abusing the child. Persecutory delusion, factitious disorder imposed on another. And then you can break that down into subcomponents. Is a allied parent, do they have a persecutory delusion that they're imposing on the child? Yes, no. Factitious attachment pathology is the allied parent creating a false factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child to meet their own needs? Yes, no. And is there spousal abuse of the targeted parent by the allied parent using the child and the child's symptoms as the weapon? So there's more specifically on each one of those. And each one of those has a DSM-5 diagnosis. Okay, so this is real stuff in the DSM-5. We need to know whether or not the allied parent has a major psychiatric disorder. Can we please assess for that the allied parent has a major psychiatric disorder, a delusional disorder? It's encapsulated. It's not from schizophrenia. It's from trauma. Unresolved trauma has distorted their thinking and perceptions to see dangers where none exist. That's the delusion. And so it's the persecutory type. They believe the child and themselves are being malevolently treated in some way when that's not true. Can we please get that assessed? Yes, no. The problem is you cannot get that those questions answered. The mental health professionals around you, when you ask them, you give them this sheet of questions and say, would you please complete this for me? The individual therapist, the reunification therapist, the custody, any therapist involved, give them that handout of diagnostic questions to be answered and ask for yes and no. And they will tell you, no, I'm not going to answer your questions. They will not diagnose the child abuse, they will not diagnose the spousal abuse, and they will not protect the child or their parent from abuse. They simply refuse to do it. They only, these forensic custody evaluators will only provide parents and the courts and the children with a forensic custody evaluation. They call them now parenting plan evaluations, and we call them a little bit different in different states, but basically it's just awful. It's an awful thing. They don't diagnose, they're not competent. They just do all this procedures over 6 to 9 months, meet with everybody, and then make up opinion. Just an opinion off the top of their head. And the awful, awful, awful New York Blue Ribbon Commission, only evaluation of forensic custody evaluations ever conducted, found that they were dangerous, harmful to children, and lack scientific and legal value. Now recognize that they are saying that the actions of the psychologists are dangerous and harmful to children. In addition to the pathology, that's already dangerous and harmful. The psychologists are doing things that are dangerous and harmful. We need to stop that. Stop doing dangerous things to parents and children. However, if we stop doing that, all the forensic custody evaluators lose their career. That's what they do. So there's a conflict of interest with them. They are only giving these custody evaluations. They are withholding diagnostic assessments, because if you get a diagnostic assessment, you don't need their custody evaluation. So they are basically, fundamentally, absolutely financially exploiting these parents and the pathology for their own financial benefits, solving nothing with the pathology. There's your institutional betrayal. There's nothing you can do as a parent, or the courts can do, as long as the mental health professionals refuse to diagnose the child abuse and tell people. They just refuse. They're ignorant, incompetent, and unethical. Here's the New York Blue Ribbon quote. You can look it up. It's 2022, several years ago. In some custody cases, because of a lack of evidence or inability of parties to pay for expensive challenges of an evaluation, defective reports can thus escape meaningful scrutiny. I'm the meaningful scrutiny, by the way. That's what I do. I read their reports. I agree 100% they're awful. These defective reports escape meaningful scrutiny and are often accepted by the court with potentially disastrous consequences. So when the court, you pay for all this money for an assessment, and if the court accepts the findings, it results in disastrous consequences. We need to stop these forensic custody evaluations. They are awful, awful, awful. Okay. And then it goes on to say, by an 11-9 margin, a majority of commission members favor elimination of forensic custody evaluations entirely, arguing that these reports are biased and harmful to children and lack scientific and legal value. At worst, evaluations can be dangerous, particularly in situations of domestic violence and child abuse. We need to stop forensic custody evaluations and go back to diagnosis and treatment. Get those diagnostic questions answered. I recommend parents get those diagnostic questions written into the court order for the assessment, so that when you give it to the forensic psychologist, they look and they say, answer these questions, yes or no. And then they can say, no, Your Honor, I'm not going to answer the questions. And I don't know what's going to happen, but it needs to stop. And we need to fix the system, stop traumatizing the children, start protecting them. So with the institutional betrayal, that's from, in my estimation, 3 locations. First, the licensing boards, those who should protect and don't. We have psychologists who are in violation of standards 2.01, boundaries of competence, 2.04, professional judgments, 9.01, bases for assessment, and 3.04, avoiding harm. That's a cascade of ethical violations. If you don't know the necessary knowledge, you can't apply the necessary knowledge. If you don't apply the necessary knowledge, your assessment is not based on established knowledge sufficient to substantiate the findings, which causes harm to the child and parent. Right across the board. So it all stems from that 2.01 boundaries of competence. They're not competent in attachment pathology. and they're not competent in delusional thought disorders. So that's the second location of the institutional betrayal, is from the forensic psychologists dorepresented by the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, the professional organization AFCC. And so they're doing dangerous and harmful things to parents, and they don't care, and they're in violation of ethical standards, and they don't care. The third location of the institutional betrayal is the American Psychological Association, who allows this to go on, and it's been captured. And that's institutional capture, that's Stigler and others, how the institution that is supposed to be regulated captures the regulatory body. And so forensic custody evaluators have captured the APA and have nullified its protective role with parents and children in order to financially exploit the parents and children in the family courts. So what I'm doing here, just give you a little bit, with the licensing boards, I've got my owls, and these are parent volunteers. I've asked for parent volunteers. I'm going to have my first meeting with them next week on Zoom. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a standard 2.01 AI review of VITA. I want these parents, to go get me the VITA of these forensic custody evaluators off the court lists, off of AFCC membership, online searches for forensic custody evaluators, and then get their VITAs. Either they're up online or request their VITA. And if they don't provide the VITA, that's data as well, withholding their knowledge from the public or their background from the public is concerning. But if we get their VITA, we're going to run it through an AI analysis. I'll ask Claude to look for competence in attachment pathology and delusional thought disorders based on their education, training, and experience. I don't care what opinion, publications, and presentation. Education, training, and experience in attachment pathology, delusional thought disorders. Where did they get that on their VITA? So we're going to be doing what the licensing boards should be doing. I've even suggested to the licensing boards directly, when I discharge my duty to protect the California Board of Psychology, you need to do this VITA review. Proactively get out there and find out what's going on, because it's a nightmare in the family courts of ignorance and incompetence. So the second thing I'm doing, though, is I'm going directly into the AFCC and the forensic psychologists and their custody evaluators. Right now, I'm doing a course review, and with potential 1.04 and 1.05 obligations for me, when I believe there may have been an ethical violation by another psychologist. Third, institutional betrayal is from the APA Ethics Committee. That's the regulatory capture and institutional betrayal. And for the APA Ethics Committee this summer, I'm anticipating somewhere around June or July, I'm going to be filing another complaint with the APA Ethics Committee, which will be my third time contacting them. Petition to the APA, 19,000 parents that completely ignored it. 6 forensic custody evaluators in violation that completely ignored it. Well, this time I'm going to write them one on institutional betrayal. So now they're just going to have to be like that little monkey, closing your eyes, see no evil. They're really going to have to try to avoid engaging the issue of the ethical violations by forensic custody evaluators all throughout the family courts. So that's what I'm doing. And here's the course. So you can see this AFCC course in Fundamentals of Conducting Parenting Plan Evaluations. It's a 28-hour online training program, 28 hours, 7 days, 14 modules. March, and so it just passed. I just took it. I've got the modules, and you can see the training team there. Some of the top tier forensic custody evaluators doing this training on how to conduct these things. So that's what I'm doing right now, as I'm going through slide by slide. I'm working with Claude on that as well, and we're going to do a workup of these forensic custody or this course. Now, in addition, I've got a catalog of concerns that I apply in my private practice. When these come in, I have about 20 concerns, and it speeds my review because they always say the same stupid things. So I always say the same things, corrective things in response. Well, now it's a catalog of concerns. I'm currently in the process of getting this put together to get up to, I'll be publishing it up to Amazon, so everybody will be able to see it, hopefully in June, July range as well. But right now I'm focused on the AFCC course. It's likely to activate standard 1.04. It already has, and for review of the first two modules and sitting in on the course. I believe there may have been an ethical violation by another psychologist, the instructors, relative to standards 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgments, 5.04 media presentations, 9.01 bases for assessment, and 2.01 boundaries of competence based on everything. So I believe there may have been an ethical violation. So now I have informal notification. So I'll be doing that come summer. So I'm working, okay, I'm working hard. But you parents are kind of stuck because you've got ignorant, incompetent mental health people who refuse to protect your child or you. So I'm a psychologist. I'm not an attorney. But from where I sit as a psychologist, I believe the situation in the family courts warrants a class action lawsuit naming the 50 state licensing boards, the AFCC, the APA, and forensic psychologists as the defendants. AI estimates between 300,000 and 1.5 million now adult children and their parents, trauma survivors from 40 years of a failed experiment on human subjects by the forensic custody evaluation industry. So I'm just putting it out there, and it has to do with Dawkins and memes. You keep tossing it out, keep tossing it until finally it enters people's understanding. And they go, oh, wow, I got a class of people who are being given inferior quality services, and I've got all the documentation. I've been here 15 years. I can provide any attorneys with all the documentation on the class action. Now, my thinking, again, psychologist, is that the attorneys settle out. You've got the deep pocket people, the 50 state licensing boards, APA, AFCC, and malpractice insurance carriers. You settle. You settle with 50 state licensing boards. They provide money and focus to fix the family courts, stop the forensic custody evaluations, and get clinical services back in. But there are no clinical services. So then you get the APA, you settle with them to get focused intervention, to get training into the family courts, to get competent assessments, maybe a pilot program for the family courts do. But you put the state legislators together with the APA to fix the family and go back to the hundreds of thousands, millions of trauma survivors in the last 40 years and do outreach to them, outreach to the now adult children, outreach to the parents who lost their children, and see what we can do about fixing that institutional betrayal that occurred earlier and fixing the relationships and helping get this resolved. So that's what I'm thinking as a clinical psychologist, but I'm just doing my other stuff. Okay. I'm only one clinical psychologist and doing what I can to get competence. So here's the situation in the family courts for you parents. The forensic psychologists in the family courts are ignorant. Google ignorant, lack of knowledge or information. They are that when the parents in the family courts are needing to educate the doctors about the pathology. Now, just let that sink in. Do you know how bad things have to be when the patient is educating the doctor about what the pathology is? That's bad. And that's exactly what's happening in the family courts. These forensic custody evaluators are absolutely stone cold ignorant, and they don't care because nobody's enforcing anything. They can just do whatever they want. The forensic custody evaluators are incompetent. They lack the needed professional knowledge in attachment pathology. When a child rejecting a parent is an attachment pathology, it's a disorganized attachment, no organized strategy to bond to the parent. And they lack competence in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders and personality disorders and family systems. And so they're not competent in the basic knowledge. And that's what we're going to look at with the 2.01 VITAs. We're just going to run them through an AI and say, where did you get your background, education, training, and experience in this? Because they're not. And if you don't know the knowledge, you can't apply the knowledge, and your basis for assessment is not sufficient to substantiate their findings, and you produce defective reports with disastrous consequences for parents and children. 3.04 harm. And they are unethical. They are, all of them are in violation of 2.01, 2.04, 9.01, 3.05, and their failure in the duty to protect children from child abuse and parents from spousal abuse. It is so, so bad. And they don't care. There's no motivation because there's no enforcement of ethical standards. You've been abandoned and isolated and given over to this little group. The licensing boards aren't protecting you. The APA is not protecting you. The AFCC is not protecting you. They are just abandoning you to the worst possible mental health services in the family courts. And the courts, I don't know why they accept it. Holy cow, the judges have these tremendously impactful decisions, and the judiciary, the family courts, are accepting this incredibly low-level mental health service. It's an experiment. It's an experiment on you, on these forensic custody evaluators and this quasi-judicial role. That's an experimental role, an experimental assessment procedure. They're experimenting on human subjects without IRB approval, without risk-benefit analysis, without protection. It is a violation of all three principles of the Belmont Report. It is so, so bad. But what can you do is you try to get for your specific family. If you just got like the worst possible mental health services, you might as well go to your car mechanic. So returning back to the traumatic grief, you and your child are being psychologically abused and traumatized by the narcissistic borderline dark personality parent. And you and your child are being psychologically abused and traumatized by the institutions that should protect you, the licensing boards and professionals, and who don't protect you. So there, again, there's your diagnostic questions to be answered. Go give them to your mental health people. Ask for yes, no on those diagnostic questions, and they will simply tell you, no, I'm not going to answer your questions for you. They are so, so bad. So you can go to my consulting website. I have all sorts of information up there. That diagnostic questions to be answered is on the attorney resource page. So click attorneys, click attorney resource. You can grab it there. I have information for the mental health professionals, all the various forms and things, and describe the pathology about that. For parents, I start with institutional betrayal, and then I have resources for you as well. And then the last one, the YouTube, I want to just point that out. I have a little YouTube page that you can go over to, and I've got all these YouTube seminars. I've selected ones out. The top one there is on diagnosing attachment pathology, but over in the left-hand side, you can go down to other ones, a contingent visitation schedule and stuff. And just I've written the book that describes the pathology in detail, that from family systems, from personality disorder, from attachment, describes it in detail. Okay, so I've given you the book. I've given you a booklet, short little booklet that tells you how to assess for it. 6 sessions. This is the assessment protocol. You can give this to your mental health people. You can give it to the court and say, I'd like this assessment, please. And I've given you the treatment, the contingent visitation schedule, if for the factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child. So I've given you everything you need. Okay, everything you need, you have. Okay, but the mental health people just simply don't care. They're ignorant, incompetent, and not ethical. Now, for the contingent visitation schedule, I also presented that to the APA National Convention in 2024, and then I came back to here and did the same seminar to YouTube. So that's up on the YouTube channel as well. So you can watch the YouTube on how to run a contingent visitation schedule. So you have all of that. And I got vignettes up there. You can look at vignettes and various other presentations. And you can just watch them right from the YouTube, so you don't have to deal with YouTube's ads or anything. You just push that little button, and there it is. It's so easy. Your mental health people, that's the diagnostic series. They say, I'm not going to talk to Dr. Childress for whatever reason. They're not going to consult with me. Well, give them the video. They can go watch the video. The GAL can go watch the video. The judge can go watch the video. Your Honor, here's what the mental health people should be doing. Here's how to do it. Attorneys can watch it. They don't have to talk to me. They're just lazy. Just lazy. Nobody cares about solving anything. The forensic custody evaluators need to go. Gone. We need to get actual, real psychologists back in the family courts. So there's my diagnostic series. I recommend this. Some really good ones. I rewatched the one on diagnosing child abuse in the family courts the other day. I like it. It's a good one. And so you got everything, and you got how to assess for parenting and DSM-5 diagnoses and delusional thought disorders and everything. The attachment pathology is the one I would recommend starting with. Go over to my parent resources section. I give you the 3 links to the institutional betrayal articles. So I've given you everything that you need. I've given the mental health professionals everything that they need. I can lead a horse or lead a psychologist to water, but you can't make them drink. The problem is the moment we stop doing custody evaluations and go back to diagnosis and treatment, all the custody evaluators are gone, and a scandal erupts about having done an experiment on human subjects without oversight, and we have all this trauma and all this child abuse in the family courts. Wow, it's going to be tremendously problematic. And then once they stop the custody evaluations, not only do all the custody evaluators disappear, but there's nobody to replace them. So you have no mental health services in the family courts. It's going to be a mess. But what are they going to do? Continue to not diagnose a child abuse? Continue to be ignorant? That's where ultimately I think it's going to take a class action lawsuit to kind of clean this up and get the APA motivated, get the licensing legislators and the licensing boards motivated. And then once the institutions are motivated to solve the institutional betrayal, it's called institutional courage, Freud. Once they're motivated, it solves immediately. Diagnose the child abuse, protect the child, fix the child, restore with the abusive parent, safeguards in place, put an outcome measure on it, 1 to 7 rating scale, affection, cooperation, social involvement, boop, done, fixed. I can probably get this fixed 6 weeks to 12 weeks, all done, fixed. And these custody evaluations go on for years, these custody battles and stuff for years, destroying the child's life. 6 to 12 weeks, all done, diagnosis guides treatment. But there's only 2 causes for treatment failure: misdiagnosis or incompetent treatment. Because if you've got an accurate diagnosis and competent treatment, you fix things. What's the problem? Misdiagnosis. They're not diagnosing the child abuse. Child abuse, not parental alienation, not resist refuse dynamic, not parent-child contact problems. child abuse, delusional disorders, factitious disorders, spousal abuse, real things in the DSM-5. So with that, I'm going to head off to the rest of my day, and good luck to everybody out there. I'm sorry you're being traumatized. I'm sorry the mental health system is so bad for you. I apologize for my psychologists, and good luck. I'll talk to you next week about some other aspect of the family courts. Take care. Bye-bye.